The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I stared at the place card with my name scrawled in gold calligraphy, Kids Table 3. Around me, the Rosewood Country Club's grand ballroom buzzed with pre-ceremony chatter, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. My sister's wedding, the most important day of her life, and I'd been seated with 8-year-olds. "Oh, good, you found your spot," came my mother's voice from behind me, dripping with that particular brand of disappointment she'd perfected over the years. Margaret Chen Williams turned to survey the elegantly decorated reception hall, her steel gray hair pulled into a severe chignon that matched her expression. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." I smoothed down my navy blue dress. Conservative, appropriate, and according to the text I'd received from my sister 3 weeks ago, hopefully not too flashy for once. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd worn this exact outfit to brief the Joint Chiefs last month, but here it was, apparently still too much. "Of course I came, Mom. It's Rebecca's wedding." Huh. She adjusted her pearls, a nervous habit that always preceded her most cutting observations. "Well, I suppose it's good you made the effort, though I do hope you won't monopolize the conversation with more stories about your little government job. People get so uncomfortable when you go on about whatever it is you do in Washington." My little government job. If she only knew that yesterday I'd sit in the Situation Room while the president asked for my personal assessment of the Middle East crisis. If only she knew that my little government job had me on speed dial with world leaders and had my photo hanging in the West Wing's classified halls. "I'll try to keep the shop talk to a minimum," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The kids' table. At my own sister's wedding? I was 34 years old, held one of the highest security clearances in the country, and managed international crises that could shift global markets. But to my family, I was still just Diane, the daughter who disappointed everyone by choosing public service over the family law practice. "Diane!" Rebecca's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts as she glided over in her stunning white gown, looking every inch the perfect bride. My younger sister had always been the golden child, valedictorian, Harvard Law, junior partner at Mom's prestigious firm by 28. Today, she was marrying Jonathan Hartwell III, whose family name adorned half the buildings in downtown Boston. "You look beautiful, Becca," I said, meaning it completely. Despite everything, I loved my sister. The complicated family dynamics had never been her fault entirely. "Thank you," she beamed, then her expression shifted slightly as she glanced at my place card. "Oh, about the seating, I know it might seem odd, but we had such a complex best list. Jonathan's family has so many important connections, and Daddy's firm partners all needed to be properly placed, and then there's Jonathan's colleagues from Goldman Sachs." "It's fine," I lied smoothly. "I understand." But Rebecca was already in full explanation mode, the way she got when she knew she'd done something that might hurt but needed to justify it anyway. "The thing is, we just ran out of room at the adult tables. Between the Hartwells, their old Boston money, you know, and Daddy's biggest clients, and all of Jonathan's business associates, we needed every seat for networking opportunities. You understand how important this wedding is for Jonathan's career trajectory and the firm's reputation?" Each word was like a small knife. I understood, all right. I understood that my presence wasn't valuable enough to warrant a seat among the important people. I understood that my career, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, the one that kept me away from family gatherings and holiday dinners because I was literally helping to keep the country safe, wasn't impressive enough to merit adult table placement. "Besides," Rebecca continued, oblivious to my internal struggle, "you've always been so good with kids. Remember how you used to babysit the neighbors? And you're not married, so you won't have a spouse to talk to anyway. This way, you can just relax and not worry about making small talk with people you don't know." People I don't know, like the Secretary of Defense, whose private number was in my phone, like the British ambassador who sent me a personal thank you note last month, like the CNN correspondent who regularly called me for background briefings. The Martinez children are at that table, she added brightly, and the Thompson twins. They're all very well behaved. Much better than trying to navigate conversation with Daddy's partners or the Hartwell family. You know how they can be about careers and achievements and all that. There it was, the unspoken truth that had hung over our family for the past 8 years. I'd chosen wrong. When I'd turned down the associate position at Chen Williams and Associates to take a temporary job with the State Department, I'd committed the cardinal sin of prioritizing service over profit, purpose over prestige, at least the kind of prestige our family understood. I'm sure they'll have lots of interesting stories about school and soccer practice, I managed, proud of how normal my voice sounded. My father approached just then, straightening his black tie and looking every inch the successful attorney he was. Richard Chen had built his firm from nothing, and his pride in that achievement was only matched by his disappointment in my career choices. Diane, there you are. I was just speaking with Judge Morrison about the Henderson case. Fascinating stuff. Real law, the kind that shapes policy. He glanced at my place card, and his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I see Rebecca's managed the seating arrangements. Quite a logistical challenge with so many distinguished guests. Distinguished guests. The phrase hung in the air like a judgment. I wasn't distinguished enough for the main tables, where the real adults sat and discussed real careers and real achievements. The Hartwells alone brought 30 people, Dad continued, and Jonathan's colleagues from Goldman Sachs. Now those are sharp minds, real movers and shakers, the kind of people who understand how the world actually works. If only he knew that just last week, I'd have been in a secure video conference with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, discussing how my department's intelligence assessments were informing monetary policy decisions that would affect every Goldman Sachs deal for the next quarter. I'm sure it'll be a lovely evening wherever I sit, I said diplomatically. That's the spirit, Mom chimed in, patting my shoulder in a way that somehow made me feel smaller rather than comforted. And really, it's probably better this way. You won't have to pretend to understand all the business talk. The partners get so intense when they're discussing merger strategies and international acquisitions. International acquisitions? Yesterday, I'd provided the intelligence briefing that would determine whether a major Chinese acquisition of American technology companies would pose a national security threat. But sure, I wouldn't understand business talk. Rebecca's maid of honor, Jessica, tottered over on impossibly high heels, champagne already working its magic on her volume control. Oh my God, Becca, your cousin just asked me what Diane actually does for work. I had no idea what to tell her. Something in government, right? Like filing papers or answering phones? The three of them looked at me expectantly, as if this was a perfectly reasonable question to ask in front of me, as if I was some sort of curiosity they needed to explain to the more successful relatives. I work in international affairs, I said simply, the same vague answer I'd been giving for years. It wasn't technically a lie, and it satisfied most people without raising questions I couldn't answer anyway. See? Jessica turned back to Rebecca triumphantly. I told your cousin it was something like that. Very nice, very public-spirited. Not everyone can be a high achiever like you and Jonathan. Not everyone can be a high achiever. The words echoed in my head as I excused myself to find the ladies' room, needing a moment to compose myself before the ceremony began. In the marble-appointed powder room, I stared at my reflection and tried to reconcile the woman looking back at me with how my family saw me. This morning, I'd been Dr. Diane Chen, Senior Director for Strategic Intelligence Analysis, the youngest person ever appointed to my position, someone whose assessments reached the president's daily briefing. Tonight, I was just the disappointing daughter who couldn't even earn a seat at the grown-ups table. My phone buzzed with a text from my security detail. Arrived at the venue, standard perimeter established, all clear for an extended timeline. I quickly typed back, maintain distance, family event, low profile and less necessary. The response came immediately. Copy that, ma'am. Will be invisible. As I tucked my phone away, I caught sight of my reflection again. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible myself. The ceremony was everything Rebecca had dreamed of: cascading white roses, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon, and 300 of Boston's most influential families gathered under the crystal chandeliers of the Rosewood's Grand Ballroom. I sat in the third row, relegated there despite being immediate family, while the Hartwell relatives occupied the prime seating up front. As Jonathan slipped the platinum band onto Rebecca's finger, I found myself studying the guest list around me. The mayor sat 2 rows ahead, next to the district attorney who'd been making headlines with his corruption investigations. Behind them, I recognized at least 4 federal judges and the senior partner from Boston's most powerful lobbying firm. These were people who shaped policy, influenced elections, and moved billions of dollars with their decisions. People who had no idea that the woman they'd dismissed to the children's section had personally briefed half their colleagues in Washington just last week. After the ceremony, cocktail hour began on the club's sprawling terrace overlooking the harbor. I nursed a glass of wine and watched my family work the crowd with practiced precision. Dad cornered Judge Morrison again, no doubt angling for referrals. Mom held court with the Hartwell matriarch, discussing their shared passion for historical preservation societies. Rebecca and Jonathan made their rounds, accepting congratulations and cementing connections that would serve them well in Boston's insular legal community. "You must be Rebecca's sister," came a voice beside me. I turned to find an older gentleman in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, his silver hair swept back and his blue eyes sharp with intelligence. "I'm William Hartwell, Jonathan's grandfather." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The patriarch himself. I'd heard stories about William Hartwell's influence, how his phone calls could make or break political careers, how his investment decisions rippled through New England's economy, how 3 generations of politicians had sought his blessing before running for office. "Diane Chen," I replied, extending my hand. "Congratulations on Jonathan. Rebecca's very happy." "Indeed. Fine young man, my grandson. Harvard Law, top of his class, already making waves at Goldman Sachs." His grip was firm, his assessment direct. "And you work in government," I believe someone mentioned. There it was again, the slight pause before government, as if the word left a bad taste. The way it was always phrased as a question, as if surely there must be some mistake, some more impressive career hiding behind the modest description. "I do," I confirmed, offering nothing more. "How civic-minded of you." His tone suggested this was roughly equivalent to volunteering at a soup kitchen. "Must be quite different from your family's legal practice. I've heard wonderful things about your father's firm. Very impressive client list." Before I could respond, Rebecca appeared at my elbow, her face flushed with champagne and happiness. "Grandpa Will, I see you've met my sister Diane. She's the one I told you about who lives in Washington." "Ah, yes, the civil servant," he nodded knowingly. "We were just discussing her career path." The way he said career path made it sound like a detour rather than a destination. Rebecca laughed, the bright, nervous laugh she'd perfected for uncomfortable social moments. "Diane's always been the idealistic one in the family. Even in college, she was more interested in Model UN than mock trial. We used to tease her about wanting to save the world." She squeezed my arm affectionately, but her words stung. "Of course, we never imagined she'd actually try to make a living at it." William Hartwell chuckled politely. "Well, someone has to do those jobs, I suppose, though I imagine the compensation is rather modest compared to private practice." "Diane's doing fine," Rebecca said quickly, her protective instincts kicking in despite everything. "She has a nice little apartment in D.C., and she seems to enjoy the work. It's very meaningful to her." A nice little apartment. If they only knew about the Georgetown townhouse with the reinforced walls and the secure communications room in the basement. If they only knew about the salary that put me in the top 5% of earners nationwide, funded by a budget line item so classified it didn't appear in any public documents. "I'm sure it is," William replied smoothly. "Public service is quite admirable, even if it doesn't offer the same opportunities as other fields." He gestured toward the crowd of successful attorneys, bankers, and business leaders. Still, we need dedicated people willing to work for the greater good, regardless of personal advancement. Personal advancement? As if I hadn't been promoted 4 times in 8 years. As if I hadn't been personally recruited by the previous administration and retained by the current one despite the political transition. If you'll excuse me, I said carefully, I should let you two catch up. I drifted away, finding myself at the edge of the terrace, where the sounds of the party faded into the evening breeze. Boston's skyline glittered across the water, and I could see the lights of Logan Airport in the distance. Tomorrow, I'd fly back to that world where my opinion mattered, where my analysis could shift foreign policy, where my name carried weight in rooms most people would never see. Not enjoying the party? I turned to find Jonathan's best man, a tall blonde man whose name I'd forgotten but whose handshake had been memorable for its calculated firmness. Everything about him screamed Goldman Sachs ambition, from his Hermes tie to his practiced networking smile. Just taking a moment, I replied politely. I'm Brad Morrison, by the way, Jonathan's roommate from Harvard, now colleagues at the firm. You're Rebecca's sister, right? The one who works for the government? I nodded, bracing myself for another round of polite condescension. That's so interesting, he continued, though his tone suggested it was anything but. What department? Treasury? Commerce? Something regulatory, I imagine? Something like that, I said evasively. I ask because we deal with a lot of federal agencies in our line of work. Trade regulations, international banking laws, compliance issues. It is always helpful to have someone on the inside who understands how these bureaucracies work. He laughed, but there was a calculation behind it. Not that I'm suggesting anything improper, of course, just useful to have contacts who can explain the process, maybe expedite some paperwork when needed. I stared at him, genuinely speechless. He was essentially asking if I could provide inside information or preferential treatment for his financial deals. This man thought I was some mid-level bureaucrat who might be willing to bend rules for family connections. I'm afraid I can't help with anything like that, I said firmly. Of course, I completely understand. Professional boundaries and all that. But his smile suggested he thought I was just playing hard to get. Still, if you ever want to discuss transitioning to private sector work, I'd be happy to make some introductions. The pay is much better, and the work is considerably more impactful. More impactful than preventing international conflicts and safeguarding national security? I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite satisfied with my current position. He shrugged, already losing interest now that I wasn't proving useful. Well, if you change your mind. Government work is fine for a while, but eventually most people want to move on to something more substantial. Something more substantial. I watched him walk away, already targeting his next networking opportunity, and felt the familiar weight of invisibility settling over me like a shroud. To everyone here, I was Rebecca's sister who'd chose poorly, the disappointing daughter who'd prioritized idealism over income, the family member they had to invite but didn't quite know what to do with. The dinner chimes sounded, calling everyone inside for the reception. Time to take my place at the kids' table, surrounded by 8-year-olds discussing their soccer tournaments and spelling bee victories. At least their accomplishments would be genuine, I thought bitterly. As I made my way back inside, I caught sight of my parents holding court with a group of their law firm partners. Dad was gesturing expansively, no doubt sharing some victory story from a recent case, while Mom nodded along with practiced pride. They looked so comfortable in this world of status and achievement, so certain of their place in the hierarchy. I wondered what they'd think if they knew their disappointment of a daughter had spent yesterday morning in a secure briefing room explaining to the Secretary of State why the intelligence I'd personally analyzed suggested we needed to completely reverse our policy toward a major ally. If they knew that my little government job had me working directly with presidents and prime ministers while they were still trying to impress local judges and city council members. But that was the thing about my work. The more important it became, the less I could say about it. Success in my field meant invisibility, meant letting people underestimate you, meant accepting that your greatest achievements would never be publicly acknowledged. Tonight, surrounded by my family's friends and colleagues, all of whom measured worth by wealth and public recognition, that invisibility felt like a prison I'd built for myself, one conversation at a time. The children's table was exactly what I'd expected, and worse. 8-year-old Emma Martinez immediately peppered me with questions about why I was sitting with them instead of the grown-ups, while her twin brother Carlos announced loudly that his mom said I was there because I didn't have a real job like the other adults. The Thompson twins, precocious 10-year-olds, seemed genuinely puzzled by my presence and kept asking if I was someone's babysitter. "Are you married?" asked Sophia Hartwell, Jonathan's niece, her gap-toothed grin making the question somehow more pointed than when adults asked it. "No, I'm not," I replied, cutting my salmon into smaller pieces to avoid the curious stares. "Is that why you're sitting with us? Because you don't have a husband to sit with?" Out of the mouths of babes. "Something like that, sweetie." While the children chatted about their schools and summer camps, I found myself observing the adult tables around us. Table 1 housed the immediate wedding party and both sets of parents. Table 2 featured the Hartwell extended family, a collection of hedge fund managers, real estate developers, and tech entrepreneurs whose combined net worth probably exceeded most small nations' GDP. Table 3 showcased Dad's law firm partners and their spouses, all deep in animated discussion about recent Supreme Court decisions and legislative changes that would affect their practices. Tables 4 through 8 contained Jonathan's Goldman Sachs colleagues, Rebecca's law school friends who'd gone on to prestigious positions at white shoe firms, and various Boston power brokers who'd known the Hartwell family for generations. The conversation was loud, confident, and punctuated by knowing laughter, the sound of people who believed they controlled the world. And then there was Table 9, where I sat with children discussing whether unicorns were real. "My daddy says you work for the government," announced 10-year-old Marcus Thompson, using the same tone he might employ to discuss someone who cleaned sewers. The casual cruelty of children, repeating overheard adult conversations without a filter. I wondered what else their parents had discussed about poor Diane Chen, the family disappointment who'd chosen public service over profit. "That's interesting," I said diplomatically. "What does your daddy do?" "He's a consultant. He helps companies make more money. Mom says he's very important because he makes lots of money and gets to travel to fancy places." I nearly choked on my wine. Thomas Thompson was indeed a consultant. Specifically, he worked for McKinsey & Company's government practice, where his primary job was analyzing federal agency efficiency. Last month, his team had presented recommendations to my department about streamlining intelligence analysis procedures. I'd sat in the back row of that briefing, listening to him explaining to my subordinates how they could better do jobs he'd never performed himself. "Diane?" My Aunt Patricia's voice carried across the room as she approached our table, her third martini making her louder than usual. Patricia was Mom's younger sister, a real estate agent who'd married well and never let anyone forget it. "There you are, hiding with the children. How perfect. Appropriate." She pulled up an empty chair from a nearby table, clearly settling in for a chat. The children immediately perked up, sensing adult drama in the air. "I was just telling the Hendersons about you," she continued, gesturing toward a couple at table 6. "They were asking about Rebecca's family, and I explained how you'd chosen such a unique path. They were fascinated. The husband works in defense contracting, actually. Makes enormous amounts of money helping the Pentagon purchase equipment. He was quite amused when I mentioned you work in government, too." Defense contracting. I'd personally reviewed and approved 3 major contracts with Henderson Defense Systems in the past 6 months, including the multi-billion-dollar communications upgrade they were currently installing across our overseas facilities. Mr. Henderson's enormous amounts of money comes directly from budgets I helped determine. "How nice," I managed. "He said it's wonderful that people like you are willing to work for such modest salaries," Patricia continued, oblivious to the increasingly uncomfortable silence from the children who were witnessing this adult conversation.
Really selfless, he called it, though he did mention that most of his government contacts eventually transition to private sector work once they realize they can triple their income overnight. Is that so? Oh, yes. He's hired dozens of former federal employees over the years. Says they're usually quite grateful for the finally make real money. She leaned closer conspiratorially. I could introduce you if you're interested. I'm sure he'd be willing to consider you for something entry level. Entry level. At a company that existed solely because of contracts I personally authorized.
That's very thoughtful, Aunt Patricia, but I'm quite happy where I am. She laughed, the sound sharp and slightly hysterical. Happy? Darling, happiness doesn't pay for retirement or a decent home. Look around you. See all these successful people? They didn't get where they are by prioritizing happiness over practicality. Young Emma Martinez piped up with startling clarity. My teacher says you should do work that makes you happy and helps other people. Patricia turned to the child with barely concealed annoyance. That's very sweet, dear, but the real world doesn't work that way. Adults have responsibilities, bills to pay, reputations to maintain, families to support. But she doesn't have a family, Sophia Hartwell pointed out helpfully. So maybe she can do work that makes her happy. The casual brutality of that observation hung in the air. No family to support, so why not settle for meaningful work that paid poorly? Why not be satisfied with helping others instead of building wealth? Why not accept that some people were destined for success while others were meant to serve? Exactly right, sweetheart, Patricia said, patting Sophia's head approvingly. Diane can afford to be idealistic because she doesn't have real responsibilities. Real responsibilities, like the daily intelligence briefings that shaped international policy, like the crisis management that prevented conflicts from escalating, like the strategic assessments that guided presidential decisions affecting millions of lives. Speaking of which, Patricia continued, clearly warming to her topic, I ran into your old college roommate Sarah last month. She's doing incredibly well. Made a partner at that big law firm in New York, bought a house in the Hamptons, married a wonderful surgeon. She asked about you, and I had to admit I wasn't quite sure how to explain your situation. My situation. Sarah Chen Williams, no relation, despite sharing a surname, was indeed doing well as a corporate attorney. She was also currently under federal investigation for helping her clients evade sanctions, a case I'd been briefed on just 2 weeks ago. Her wonderful surgeon husband was facing his own scrutiny for Medicare fraud. But I couldn't exactly share that information at a children's table during my sister's wedding reception. Sarah always was ambitious, I said, carefully. Exactly. That's what I told her. Some people have drive, others find their own path. Patricia's smile was meant to be encouraging, but felt more like a pat on the head. There's nothing wrong with being the family member who chooses service over success. Every family needs one, I suppose. The children had grown quiet, sensing the underlying tension, even if they didn't fully understand it. I caught Emma Martinez staring at me with the kind of intense curiosity children reserve for puzzles they can't solve. Are you sad? She asked, suddenly, her voice cutting through Patricia's continued monologue about successful relatives and missed opportunities. The question caught me off guard. Was I sad? Angry, certainly. Frustrated, absolutely. Tired of being invisible, definitely. But sad? Sometimes, I admitted honestly. Why don't you tell them what you really do? She pressed, with 8-year-old directness. If it's important work, why don't you just explain it? Patricia laughed nervously. Oh, sweetheart, Diane's work is very technical, difficult to explain, government paperwork and such. But Emma wasn't satisfied. My mom says if you're proud of something, you should be able to talk about it. Are you proud of your work? The entire table, children and Patricia, waited for my answer. In the background, I could hear the adult tables erupting in laughter over some shared joke,
probably about market trends or legal victories or political connections. The sound of people who never questioned their own importance. Yes, I said, quietly, meeting Emma's earnest gaze. I'm very proud of my work. Then why don't the grown-ups think it's not important? There it was, the question that cut to the heart of everything. Why did the grown-ups think it wasn't important? Because they measured importance by income and status rather than impact. Because they valued visible success over invisible service. Because they'd created a world where worth was determined by wealth rather than contribution. Sometimes, I told Emma carefully, the most important work happens where people can't see it. Patricia snorted softly. Well, that's certainly one way to look at it. But Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 8-year-old mind. Like how my mom says teachers are really important even though they don't make lots of money. Something like that. As the dinner service continued and the children returned to their animated discussions of summer vacation plans, I found myself thinking about Emma's question. Why didn't I tell them what I really did? The answer was more complicated than classification levels and security clearances. The real reason was that I'd grown tired of the disbelief, the skeptical looks, the assumption that if I really held such an important position, surely they would have heard about it. In my family's world, success was meant to be visible, quantifiable, impressive to strangers at cocktail parties. My success was measured in crises prevented, conflicts avoided, intelligence gathered that would never appear in newspapers. How do you explain to people obsessed with status that your greatest achievements were things that never happened? The irony was that everyone at this wedding, from the defense contractor who profited from my budget decisions to the law firm partners who represented clients affected by policies I helped shape, lived in a world my work directly influenced. They just didn't know it. And maybe it was time they did. The dinner plates had been cleared, and the children at my table were growing restless. Emma Martinez had started folding napkins into origami animals, while the Thompson twins debated whether dessert would be chocolate cake or something fancy and gross. I envied their simple concerns as I watched the adult tables transitioning into their most animated phase of the evening, the networking dessert course. Rebecca stood up at the head table, champagne flute in hand, her cheeks flushed with happiness and alcohol. Before we cut the cake, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Having all our family and friends together means everything to Jonathan and me. She gestured toward our parents' table, especially our parents, who've worked so hard to build the foundations that got us here tonight. Dad, your legal expertise and business acumen have been an inspiration to both of us. Mom, your grace and wisdom have shaped who we've become. The room erupted in polite applause. I clapped along, trying to ignore the way Rebecca's eyes skipped over me entirely as she continued her speech. We're also so grateful to be surrounded by such accomplished people tonight. The Hartwell family has welcomed us with open arms, and we're honored to join such a distinguished legacy. Jonathan's colleagues from Goldman Sachs, our friends from law school who are already making their mark in prestigious firms, and all the wonderful people who've supported us along the way. More applause. Not a single mention of the family member who'd chosen a different path. Not even a polite acknowledgement of the sister who'd flown up from Washington for this celebration. Jonathan and I know how fortunate we are to be starting our marriage surrounded by so much success and ambition. We hope to live up to the examples you've all set, building meaningful careers, contributing to our communities, and creating the kind of prosperity that allows us to give back. I felt the familiar knot in my stomach tighten, contributing to communities, creating prosperity, giving back, as if my work didn't involve any of those things, as if preventing international conflicts and protecting national security were somehow less meaningful than maximizing investment returns or winning corporate lawsuits. And of course, Rebecca added with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, we're grateful for all our family members who could be here tonight, regardless of their diverse career paths. There it was, the diplomatic acknowledgement that didn't actually acknowledge anything. Diverse career paths, as if I'd chosen interpretive dance or street performing instead of serving my country at the highest levels of government. The applause died down, and conversations resumed at a higher volume than before. I watched my father lean across to shake hands with Judge Morrison, sealing some deal or arrangement that would benefit both their careers. Mom air-kissed the Hartwell matriarch, cementing her position in Boston's social hierarchy. Everyone was exactly where they belonged in this carefully orchestrated display of success and connection. Everyone except me. "Excuse me," I murmured to the children, who barely looked up from their increasingly elaborate napkin sculptures. I needed air, space, a moment away from the suffocating atmosphere of accomplished people discussing their accomplished lives. I slipped out onto the terrace again, where the cool evening breeze provided blessed relief from the overheated ballroom. The harbor sparkled with reflected lights, and in the distance I could see planes taking off from Logan Airport, people heading to destinations unknown, escaping to places where they might be valued differently. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from my deputy director. "Urgent development in the Morrison situation. Need your assessment within the hour." The Morrison situation, a delicate intelligence matter involving a potential security breach that could affect 3 allied nations, the kind of crisis that required immediate attention from someone with my clearance level and regional expertise, the kind of work that would keep me up until dawn analyzing classified reports and drafting recommendations that would reach the president's desk by morning. I typed back quickly, "Currently at a family event. Can a conference call in 30 minutes?" The response was immediate. "Understood. A secure line will be set up. Thank you, ma'am." Ma'am. In 30 minutes, I'd be briefing senior officials on a matter of international importance, but right now, I was the family disappointment who couldn't even earn a proper seat at her sister's wedding. There you are. Brad Morrison's voice interrupted my thoughts as he stepped onto the terrace, loosening his tie slightly. "Mind if I join you? It's getting pretty intense there." I gestured toward the empty space beside me at the railing. "By all means." "Your sister certainly knows how to throw a party," he said, sipping what looked like his 4th scotch of the evening. Though I have to say, the conversation at our table got pretty heavy. Jonathan's grandfather was holding forth on international trade policy, and some of the other guys were debating the latest Fed decisions. International trade policy. Yesterday, I reviewed intelligence reports that would directly inform the next round of trade negotiations with 3 major partners, but I simply nodded politely. "Must be nice to not have to worry about all that stuff," Brad continued, mistaking my silence for incomprehension. "Government work probably keeps you pretty insulated from real economic pressures." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "Well, steady paycheck, decent benefits, not having to worry about market fluctuations or client demands. Must be relaxing, not having to constantly prove your worth or justify your existence." He laughed, clearly thinking he was being generous. "Sometimes I envy people in positions like yours. No real pressure, no life or death decisions, just showing up and doing your bit for society." No life or death decisions. Just this morning, I'd signed off on an assessment that would determine whether we provided intelligence support for a counterterrorism operation in Eastern Europe. Lives literally hung in the balance of decisions I made before breakfast. "I imagine it gets boring sometimes, though," he continued. "Must be frustrating being so far removed from where real decisions get made. At Goldman, we're right in the center of things. Our choices affect global markets, shape economic policy, influence government decisions." Shape economic policy, influence government decisions. The breathtaking arrogance of it struck me speechless. This man genuinely believed that his investment recommendations carried more weight than classified intelligence assessments that reached world leaders. "Take this trade situation with China, for example," Brad said, gesturing with his scotch glass. "We're advising our clients on positioning for the next round of negotiations. Real money at stake, real consequences. Meanwhile, I'm sure there are dozens of government analysts somewhere pushing papers around, thinking they understand what's really happening." Dozens of government analysts. Like me, pushing papers around, like the comprehensive intelligence report I'd personally authored last week that outlined exactly how China was manipulating trade data and what our negotiating position should be in response. The thing is, he continued, completely oblivious to the irony, people in the financial sector understand how the world actually works. We see the real numbers, deal with the actual consequences, make decisions that matter. Government types are always playing catch-up, trying to regulate industries they don't really understand. My phone buzzed again, another encrypted message. Conference call moved up to 15 minutes. High priority briefing needed for morning NSC meeting. NSC, National Security Council. In 15 minutes, I'd be providing analysis that would inform discussions in the Situation Room. But according to Brad Morrison, I was just a paper pusher playing catch-up with his superior understanding of how the world worked. I don't mean to sound condescending, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. It's just that people in government work often don't realize how limited their perspective is. They think they're serving the country, which is admirable, but they're really just working within systems that people like us design and control. Systems that people like him designed and controlled. The financial sector that required constant oversight to prevent the kind of catastrophic failures that had crashed the global economy just over a decade ago. The same sector that operated under regulations crafted by people with exactly my background and expertise. You seem like a smart woman, he continued, his voice taking on what I recognized as his networking tone. Have you ever considered transitioning to private sector work? With your government experience, you could probably land a decent position somewhere. Not at Goldman level, obviously, but maybe something in compliance or regulatory affairs. Something in compliance. A support role where my government experience might be useful for helping financial institutions navigate the very regulations I helped create. Where I could trade my security clearance and policy expertise for a junior position at a firm that saw my background as a minor asset rather than a fundamental qualification. The pay would be much better, he added helpfully, probably double or triple what you're making now. And you'd finally be working somewhere that actually influences policy instead of just implementing it. Actually influences policy, as opposed to my current role where I merely helped determine what that policy should be in the first place. I appreciate the suggestion, I said carefully, but I'm quite committed to my current position. He shrugged, already losing interest. Well, if you change your mind, most government people eventually realize they want to move up to something more significant. Something more significant than protecting national security and shaping international relations. As he wandered back inside to rejoin the conversation about real decisions and meaningful work, I stood alone on the terrace, watching planes disappear into the night sky. In 10 minutes, I'd excuse myself to take a classified briefing that would affect the course of international relations. But to everyone at this wedding, I was just Rebecca's sister who'd settled for less. The time had come to stop settling for their ignorance. I checked my watch. 7 minutes until the secure conference call that would determine our response to an international crisis. Around me, the wedding reception continued in blissful ignorance. Toasts about success and achievement from people who had no idea what real responsibility looked like. "There you are," came my mother's voice as she approached with a determined expression. She'd clearly been sent on a mission. "People are starting to ask where you disappeared to. It looks odd you wandering off during the toast." I needed some air. "Well, you've had it. Come back inside. The Hendersons want to meet you. Apparently, they found it amusing that you work in government, too." She adjusted her pearls nervously. "Please try to make a good impression. They're very important clients of your father's firm." Very important clients, whose defense contracts I'd personally approved just months ago. "Actually, Mom, I need to make a quick phone call. Work emergency." Her face tightened with familiar disapproval. "Diane, this is your sister's wedding. Surely whatever government paperwork you're dealing with can wait until Monday." Government paperwork? If only she knew that in 5 minutes, I'd be briefing officials about a situation that could destabilize an entire region if handled incorrectly. It's urgent, I said simply. Everything's urgent when you're trying to seem important, she replied sharply. Come inside and act like a normal person for once. This constant need to make your little job seem dramatic is embarrassing. My little job, the one that had me on speed dial with heads of state and intelligence agencies across 5 continents. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Not a regular call, the distinctive tone that indicated a secure, encrypted line, the kind of call that couldn't wait, couldn't be ignored, couldn't be explained to civilian family members. Excuse me, I said, stepping further away and accepting the call. Dr. Chen, thank you for making time, came the voice of Deputy Director Harrison, his tone grave even through the encryption. We have a developing situation in Eastern Europe. The intelligence you flagged last week about Russian troop movements was accurate. They've accelerated their timeline. I turned my back to my mother, lowering my voice. What's the current assessment? 3 allied nations are requesting immediate consultation on response options. The president wants your personal analysis on his desk within the hour. Can you conference in for the emergency briefing? Yes, connecting now.
I glanced back at my mother, who was standing with her arms crossed, radiating disapproval. Beyond her, through the terrace doors, I could see the wedding reception in full swing. Successful people celebrating success, measuring worth by wealth and status. Dr. Chen, came another voice on the line. This is General Matthews from the Joint Chiefs. We need your assessment on the intelligence package you submitted yesterday. My assessment? My intelligence package? The document that would inform military decisions affecting thousands of lives? One moment, General, I said, then looked directly at my mother. Mom, I need you to go back inside. This conversation is classified. She blinked in surprise. Classified? What are you talking about? I'm talking about national security. Please go inside. For the first time in years, uncertainty flickered across her face, but then her expression hardened. Stop being ridiculous, Diane. Just hang up and come inside like a responsible adult. The conference call continued in my ear. Dr. Chen, we're waiting for your input. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. I looked at my mother, at the wedding reception beyond her, at the life I'd been expected to choose but had walked away from. Then I made a decision that would change everything. Actually, Mom, everyone should hear this conversation. I strode past her into the ballroom, the secure line still active in my ear. The room was buzzing with post-dinner conversation, network building, deal-making, the kind of talk that made people feel important. Excuse me, I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the room. The conversations gradually died down as heads turned in my direction. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to take this call. It's urgent. Rebecca looked mortified. Diane, what are you doing? I walked to the center of the dance floor where everyone could see and hear me clearly. At the head table, William Hartwell was frowning with obvious disapproval, while the defense contractor Henderson looked confused by the disruption. Dr. Chen, came the voice from my phone, audible now in the sudden quiet. General Matthews needs your immediate assessment on the Russian situation. I took a deep breath and answered clearly, knowing my voice would carry to every corner of the room. General Matthews, based on the intelligence analysis my team completed yesterday, I recommend we move to DEFCON 3 positioning for Eastern European assets while maintaining diplomatic channels through the Brussels back channel we established last month. The silence in the room was complete. Every fork stopped moving, every conversation died, every eye fixed at me with expressions ranging from confusion to shock. Dr. Chen, came another voice through the phone. Secretary Morrison wants to know if you can join the emergency NSC meeting tomorrow morning. NSC? National Security Council. The words hung in the air like a revelation. I'll tell the secretary I'll be there. I'll have the full strategic analysis ready by 0600. I could see faces around the room changing as the implications sank in. Brad Morrison, who'd been holding forth about real decision-making just minutes before, was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. Thomas Thompson, the consultant who'd explained to my subordinates how to do their jobs better, had gone pale. Dr. Chen, came the general's voice again, one more thing. The president specifically requested your personal briefing on China trade intelligence. Your assessment last week was instrumental in changing our negotiating position. The China trade intelligence, the same situation Brad had been explaining to me with such condescending confidence, the same negotiations that Henderson Defense Systems would profit from based on decisions I was helping to make. I'll prepare that briefing as well, General. Anything else? That's all for now, ma'am. Thank you for your immediate response despite the family obligations. The country is fortunate to have someone of your caliber available for crisis situations. Someone of my caliber. Available for crisis situations. The words echoed through the silent ballroom like a challenge to everything these people believed about success and importance. Always available when needed, General. Dr. Chen out. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my clutch. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of traffic from the street outside. 100 of Boston's most successful people stared at me as if I had just materialized from another dimension. Finally, William Hartwell found his voice. Dr. Chen? His tone was completely different now, cautious, respectful, uncertain. We had no idea. No, I agreed quietly. You didn't. Judge Morrison rose from his seat, his face flushed with something between embarrassment and recognition. The Morrison case they mentioned, that's the classified matter involving international court jurisdiction. I've been waiting 6 months for State Department guidance on how to proceed. The guidance went out yesterday, I said simply. Check your secure channels Monday morning. Henderson, the defense contractor who'd found my government work so amusing, stood up slowly. Eastern European assets, those are the installations my company is upgrading, the communication systems we're installing, are based on specifications my department provided, Mr. Henderson. I finished for him. Your contracts require our security approval for a reason. Thomas Thompson, the consultant who'd explained government inefficiency to my own staff, looked like he might be sick. The intelligence analysis? You're the Dr. Chen who authored the comprehensive assessment on federal agency optimization? Among other things, I replied. Rebecca had sunk into her chair, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. Jonathan sat beside her, his Harvard law training apparently insufficient to help him process what he had just witnessed. My father stood up slowly, his legal mind finally connecting the dots he had ignored for 8 years. Diane, your security clearance? Your position? Dear God, what exactly do you do?
I looked around the room at all these successful, accomplished people who'd spent the evening explaining to me how the world really worked. Financial advisors who influenced policy I helped create. Defense contractors who implemented systems I designed. Consultants who optimized agencies I directed. Lawyers who waited for guidance I provided. I serve my country, I said simply, and apparently I serve all of you as well. The silence that followed was different now, not the dismissive quiet of people uncomfortable with failure, but the stunned silence of people realizing they'd completely misunderstood everything. Finally, 8-year-old Emma Martinez's voice cut through the tension from the children's table. I told you her work was important. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Yes, Emma, you did. The aftermath of my phone call created a ripple effect that transformed the entire atmosphere of the reception. Conversations resumed, but in hushed, urgent tones as people processed what they'd just witnessed. I watched the social hierarchy of the room recalibrate itself in real time. Brad Morrison was the first to approach, his earlier confidence replaced by something approaching panic. Dr. Chen, I had no idea about your position. When you mentioned government work, I assumed, he trailed off, realizing that finishing that sentence would only make things worse. You assumed I was a mid-level bureaucrat, I said calmly, someone whose job you didn't need to respect or understand. That's not, I never intended.
He struggled for words, his Goldman Sachs training apparently inadequate for this situation. Look, about those comments I made earlier regarding policy influence and government analysts. You mean when you explained how people like you design and control the systems that people like me merely work within? His face flushed red. I was speaking generally about the financial sector's role in— Brad, I cut him off gently. Do you know what the Morrison Doctrine is? He shook his head, confusion evident. It's a strategic framework for international economic policy that your firm has been implementing in their emerging markets division for the past 18 months. It's named after the situation we just discussed on my call. I paused, watching comprehension dawn. I wrote it. The blood drained from his face entirely. You wrote the Morrison Doctrine? Along with the supporting intelligence assessments that Goldman Sachs has been using to guide their international investments. The same assessments you've been presenting to clients as market insights. I smiled slightly. I'm curious, when you brief clients on geopolitical risk factors, do you mention that your analysis comes from classified intelligence reports? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly realizing he was in territory far beyond his expertise. Mr. Henderson approached next, his earlier amusement completely absent. Dr. Chen, I owe you an apology. I had no idea you were the senior official who's been overseeing our contract approvals. The contracts that make you enormous amounts of money, I said, echoing his earlier phrasing. The ones you described as helping the Pentagon purchase equipment. Yes, well, I should clarify. Mr. Henderson, your company exists because of national security requirements that my department identifies and budget allocations we recommend. Every installation you're upgrading, every system you're installing, every specification you're following originated from assessments my team and I provided. I met his eyes directly. When you mentioned that government types don't understand the industries they regulate, which industry were you referring to exactly? He stammered something about miscommunication and context, but I'd already moved on. Because approaching me now, with considerably more trepidation, was Thomas Thompson. Dr. Chen, he began carefully, I realize there may have been some confusion earlier when I mentioned optimization consulting. There was no confusion, Mr. Thompson. You presented efficiency recommendations to my staff based on analysis of processes you'd never performed yourself. Then you charged the government 6 figures for advice on how to do jobs you've never held. The McKinsey assessment was requested through proper channels, by officials who didn't realize they were paying consultants to tell career intelligence professionals how to analyze intelligence more effectively. I tilted my head thoughtfully. Tell me, when you recommended streamlining our assessment procedures, did you consider how that might affect the accuracy of reports that reach presidential briefings? His confident consulting demeanor crumbled entirely. We focused on efficiency metrics rather than operational impact. Efficiency, I nodded slowly. Yesterday morning, one of those supposedly inefficient processes you recommended eliminating caught a potential security breach that could have compromised assets in 4 countries. But I suppose efficiency is more important when you're billing by the hour. While these conversations unfolded, I became aware of another dynamic developing across the room. Judge Morrison was speaking intensely with my father, their heads bent together in what looked like urgent consultation. The Hartwell family had gathered in a tight cluster, with William Hartwell gesturing emphatically as he spoke to his son and daughter-in-law. Other clusters formed and reformed as people shared information and reassessed relationships. But the most significant change was happening at the head table, where Rebecca sat staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Jonathan leaned in to whisper something, but she shook her head sharply, never taking her eyes off me. Dr. Chen. A new voice interrupted my observation. I turned to find a woman I didn't recognize, though her expensive jewelry and confident bearing marked her as someone accustomed to importance. I'm Victoria Ashworth, from the State Department's Protocol Office. I believe we've worked together, though only through official channels. The name clicked immediately. Victoria Ashworth handled diplomatic protocol for high-level meetings, including several I'd attended in my official capacity. But I'd never met her personally. Miss Ashworth, I didn't realize you were a guest here.
Family friend of the Hartwells, she explained. When I heard the name Dr. Chen during your phone call, I wondered if it could be the same Dr. Chen whose briefings have been so invaluable to our diplomatic initiatives. She smiled genuinely. I must say, finding you here is quite a surprise. I imagine it is. Your assessment of the Belgian situation last month was particularly insightful. The ambassador credited your intelligence with preventing a significant diplomatic incident. She glanced around the room, taking in the stunned faces and urgent conversations. I take it your family wasn't aware of your position? They knew I worked in government, I said diplomatically. Victoria's laugh was knowing. Yes, I imagine they did. It's fascinating how people hear government work and assume bureaucratic paperwork rather than policy creation. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. I've been in similar situations at social events. People love to explain international relations to me without realizing I help coordinate those relations for a living. Before I could respond, my mother appeared at my elbow, looking more flustered than I'd ever seen her. Diane, I need to speak with you privately. Actually, Mrs. Chen, Victoria interjected smoothly, I was hoping to discuss the upcoming Brussels conference with your daughter. Her input has been specifically requested by several Allied intelligence chiefs. My mother's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Allied intelligence chiefs. The phrase seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Perhaps we could continue this conversation later, I told Victoria. I should speak with my family. Of course. But Dr. Chen, I hope you'll consider my invitation to the Georgetown reception next month. Several cabinet members have expressed interest in your insights on the emerging Pacific situation. Cabinet members? As Victoria walked away, I watched my mother process this latest revelation. Around us, the reception continued, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. People who'd ignored me earlier now watched my every movement. Conversations stopped when I passed. The subtle but unmistakable signs of deference that I was accustomed to in Washington had followed me to Boston. Diane, my mother began, her voice unsteady. I don't understand what's happening here. These people, they're talking about you like you're important, I suggested quietly. But you work for the government. You live in an apartment. You don't have... She gestured helplessly, struggling to reconcile her perception with reality. I don't have what, Mom? A corner office with my name on the door? A title that impresses strangers at dinner parties? Visible markers of success that you can brag about to your friends? That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. I turned to face her fully. For 8 years, you've measured my worth by standards that have nothing to do with the actual impact of my work. You've dismissed my career because it doesn't fit your definition of success. Patricia materialized beside us, her martini forgotten as she stared at me with newfound calculation. Diane, dear, I had no idea you were so, well, connected. When I mentioned introducing you to the Hendersons earlier, I never imagined you already knew them professionally. Professionally? The word hung between us, loaded with implications she was only beginning to grasp. Aunt Patricia, when you suggested I transition to private sector work because government jobs don't pay well, what salary range were you imagining? She laughed nervously. Well, I assumed government salaries were fairly modest, maybe 60, 70,000. My salary is classified, I said simply, but I can tell you it's substantially higher than that. How much higher? My mother asked faintly. I looked around the room at all these successful, wealthy people who'd spent the evening explaining my place in the world to me. Higher than most people in this room earn, Mom, including some of the lawyers, bankers, and consultants who've been giving me career advice tonight. The silence that followed was profound, but it was broken by an unexpected sound, Rebecca's voice, calling my name from across the room. She was standing now, her wedding dress flowing around her as she approached with determined steps.
"Diane," she said when she reached us, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet space around us. "I think it's time we had a real conversation." Rebecca stood before me in her wedding dress, but the radiant bride from earlier had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. Her eyes held a mixture of shame, confusion, and something that might have been respect, an emotion I'd never seen from her before. "I owe you an apology," she said, "not just for tonight, but for years of not seeing who you really are." The conversations around us had quieted again, people straining to hear this family drama unfold. I could feel the weight of their attention, but for once, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like a witness to something that should have happened years ago. "Rebecca, this is your wedding day. We don't need to—" "Yes, we do," she cut me off with surprising firmly. "I seated you with children, Diane. Children. Because I thought you weren't important enough to sit with adults. I actually believed my law firm achievements mattered more than what you do every day." Jonathan appeared beside us, his face grave. "Dr. Chen, I've been thinking about some of the cases I've worked on at Goldman Sachs. International compliance issues, regulatory guidance we've been waiting for." He paused, understanding dawning. "How many of those decisions that affect our clients come from your department?" "Most of them," I said honestly. "The international banking regulations your firm operate under, the trade policies that shape your investment strategies, the security assessments that determine which foreign partnerships are approved. My department either creates or influences the majority of that framework."
He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing his perfectly styled wedding look. Jesus, and I was sitting there explaining market forces to you like you were a college freshman. You weren't alone in that, I said gently, glancing around the room where multiple conversations had stopped entirely as people focused on our exchange. William Hartwell approached with measured steps, his earlier dismissive authority replaced by careful respect. "Dr. Chen, I believe I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an explanation." He straightened his shoulders, every inch the Boston patriarch, but his tone was humble. "For 40 years, I've measured success by very narrow criteria: wealth, social position, traditional markers of achievement. Tonight, you've shown me how limited that perspective really is." "Mr. Hartwell, please let me finish." He held up a hand. "My grandson is marrying into a family that includes someone who literally shapes the world my businesses operate in, someone whose work affects international markets, global security, the very foundations of the prosperity I've spent my life building. And I dismissed you as unimportant because you chose service over profit." He paused, looking around the room at the assembled guests. "I think many of us made that mistake tonight." My father stepped forward then, his face pale but determined. "Diane, I need to say something publicly." He cleared his throat, addressing not just me, but the entire room. 8 years ago, my daughter told me she wanted to leave our family law firm to work in government service. I told her that no daughter of mine was going to be a glorified waitress. The admission hung in the air, raw and honest. Several people shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own prejudices in his words. "I was wrong," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "Not just about her career choice, but about what service means, about what real achievement looks like. I've spent my career winning cases and building a practice, and I'm proud of that work. But my daughter—" he struggled with the words. "My daughter helps prevent wars. She protects our country. She influences policies that affect millions of lives." I turned to address me directly. "I failed you as a father. I failed to understand, to support, to recognize your achievements for what they really are. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was broken by unexpected applause. It started with Emma Martinez at the children's table, her 8-year-old hands clapping enthusiastically. Then Victoria Ashworth joined in, followed by Judge Morrison, and within moments, the entire room was applauding. But it wasn't the polite, obligatory applause of social events. It was something deeper: acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps a collective apology for assumptions made and opportunities missed.
As the applause died down, my mother stepped forward. Her composed mask had cracked completely, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "I don't even know how to begin," she whispered. "All these years, I thought you were wasting your potential. I thought you were settling for less because you couldn't achieve more. I was so wrong, Diane, so completely wrong." She reached for my hands, her grip desperate. "When that general called you ma'am on the phone, when he thanked you for your service, I realized I've never thanked you. Not once. My own daughter serving our country at the highest levels, and I've never been proud of you for it." "Mom, let me say this," she interrupted. "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the work you do, the sacrifices you've made, the person you've become despite having no support from your family. I'm proud, and I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." The emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming. 8 years of dismissal, of feeling invisible in my own family, of watching my achievements go unrecognized, all of it was shifting in real time. But it was Emma Martinez who provided the perfect punctuation to the evening. The 8-year-old had climbed down from her chair and was walking toward me with purpose, her flower girl dress trailing behind her. "Dr. Chen," she said with the serious tone children use for important announcements, "I have a question." "What's that, Emma?" "If you're so important that generals and presidents listen to you, why were you sitting with us kids?" The innocent directness of the question sent a ripple of uncomfortable laughter through the room. Several adults looked away, ashamed of their role in that seating arrangement. "That's a very good question," I said seriously. "Why do you think I was sitting with you?" She considered this with 8-year-old gravity. "Because the grown-ups made a mistake?" "That's exactly right. The grown-ups made a mistake." "Well," she announced to the room with the confidence only children possess, "that was a really dumb mistake. You're way more interesting than most grown-ups." The laughter that followed was genuine, breaking some of the tension while reinforcing the truth of her observation. Brad Morrison approached hesitantly, clearly still processing everything. "Dr. Chen, I want to apologize for my comments earlier about government work being less impactful than private sector positions." He paused, struggling with his words. "I realize now that I was speaking from ignorance. Your work literally creates the framework that makes my job possible." "Apology accepted," I said simply. Would it be possible to learn more about what you do? I mean, obviously not classified details, but the kind of work, the scope of influence?" He trailed off, realizing how inadequate his request sounded. "Brad, you spend your days helping wealthy people become wealthier through international investments. I spend my days trying to prevent international conflicts that would make those investments worthless. We're both serving important functions in the global economy. You just didn't realize we were on the same team." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. People who'd ignored me earlier now approached with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about international relations and policy development. Business cards were offered with real purpose rather than polite obligation. But the most significant change was in my family. Rebecca hugged me goodbye with tears in her eyes, whispering apologies for years of misunderstanding. My parents stood together, looking at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "Will you come to dinner next Sunday?" my mother asked hopefully. "I'd like to try again, to listen this time, instead of assuming." "I'd like that," I said honestly. As I prepared to leave, Jonathan pulled me aside. "Dr. Chen, I know this is probably inappropriate given everything that happened tonight, but I have to ask. Goldman Sachs occasionally consults with government officials on international policy matters. Would it be possible to include you in those discussions?" I smiled at the irony. "Jonathan, Goldman Sachs doesn't consult with government officials on international policy. Government officials consult with Goldman Sachs when they need to understand how policy decisions will affect financial markets. But yes, I'd be happy to participate in those conversations from the appropriate side." His face reddened as he realized the reversal, but he managed a sheepish smile. "I'm still learning how the world really works, apparently." "We all are," I said gently. As I walked toward the exit, Emma Martinez called out from across the room, "Dr. Chen, next time you come to a party, make sure they put you at the important table." "I will, Emma," I called back. "I definitely will." Outside the country club, my security detail materialized from their discreet positions, following into step beside me as I walked toward my car. "How did the family event go, ma'am?" Agent Rodriguez asked with careful neutrality. I thought about the question as we reached my vehicle. How has it gone? I'd been humiliated, dismissed, and relegated to a children's table. But I'd also finally stopped hiding who I was, finally claimed my proper place, finally received the recognition I'd earned through years of service. "It went exactly as it needed to," I said finally, "and I think Sunday dinner is going to be very different from now on." As we drove away from the Rosewood Country Club, I reflected on the evening's events. Tomorrow, I'd return to Washington, to briefings and crises, and the weight of decisions that shaped the world. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, I was driving home as exactly who I was, Dr. Diane Chen, trusted advisor to presidents and generals, guardian of national security, and finally, the family member my parents could be proud of. The children's table had taught me something valuable after all. Sometimes the most honest perspectives come from people who haven't learned to hide the truth behind social conventions. And sometimes the best way to claim your seat at the adult table is to stop pretending you don't deserve it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.